Good afternoon, and welcome to our New York Archives Magazine online speaker series. I'm Josie Madison, editor of New York Archives. Today, we're joined by Ross Levi and Tom Ruller for our program, Finding What You Love in New York, Marketing the Empire State. Ross D. Levi is the executive director of the New York State Division of Tourism and leads the state's promotional and industry efforts under the iconic I Love New York tourism brand to grow visitation and position New York as a premier global destination. Since joining Empire State Development in 2012, Ross has helped launch tourism efforts including the Governor's Tourism Summits, I Love New York LGBTQ, Path Through History, Accessible New York, the Adirondack and Catskill Challenges, and the Tourism Return to Work and Meet in New York grant programs. Prior to joining Empire State Development, Ross was executive director of New York's statewide LGBTQ advocacy group, a legislative director in the New York State Senate, and a marketing professional in the motion picture industry. Thomas J. Ruller recently retired as New York State Archivist, having held the position since 2015. He has been an active professional and is the author of several peer-reviewed journal articles and reviews on the use of technology in archives and the preservation of records in electronic form. He's been a consultant for several state governments and other organizations focusing on electronic records management and preservation. So for those of you who have joined us today, welcome and thank you. There will be a question and answer session at the end of the presentation, so please feel free to submit questions throughout using the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we will try to get to as many of those as we can at the end of the presentation. And in the meantime, I am pleased to introduce Ross Levi and Tom Ruller.
Thank you very much, Josie. I think today's program is a great testament or testimony to the power of weather. Weather can even influence technology and the internet. You know, we were originally scheduled to do this a few days ago, or a week ago or so, and a little bit of snow got in the way. So it's great that we're here today. I think this is a great program because it provides a wonderful story of how New York's efforts, state government's efforts continue. You know, these are activities that started a long time ago that we continue to do today. At the State Archives, we have nearly 170 boxes of promotional films and audio recordings from the Department of Commerce, the Department of Economic Development, Empire State Development. New York has been working very hard to promote our entire state as a great tourism destination, both for people who live here already, so they can be aware of what's going on across the state that they live in, but also to draw people in. I think one of the things in our collection is an iconic set of videos that we all, well, I shouldn't say all of us of a certain age, and many of us of other ages are very familiar with. We all know the I Love New York campaign. So before we go too far, I thought I'd share one of these videos. We've digitized quite a bit of them, and this is available on our website. So I'm going to do what I can to see if I can control technology and show this video.
There's only one Broadway. It's in New York. I love New York. I love New York. I love New York. I love New York. Introducing I Love New York Broadway Show Tours. 16 specially priced packages of shows and hotels. For a free booklet, see your travel agent or call toll-free 800-331-1000.
I love New York, especially in the evening.
That was fun. Almost all of those I Love New York videos are available on our website. And those 170 boxes are also available for research. And New York continues to do this good work to make sure that people are aware of the treasures all across our state and the great things to do, the great destinations. And Ross, you're leading that effort today. So maybe you can tell us a little bit more about how people can discover and learn about our great state.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Tom, and good morning, everybody. The first most dramatic moment of the day is making sure I've got the technology work. If folks can confirm that they can see my screen with the tulips, hopefully, that the PowerPoint I'm going to be leading you through this morning.
It looks great.
Great, perfect. That's what I like to hear. So great. Very excited to talk to folks today about what we do here at I Love New York. We are actually the Division of Tourism for New York State, located here at Empire State Development, which is the state's economic development agency. I Love New York, and the Division of Tourism is the official destination marketing organization for New York State. In the industry, we call that a DMO. Our job is to promote travel to all of New York State under, of course, that iconic I Love New York logo and the I Love New York campaign that Tom was talking about earlier on. How do we do that? We basically use our various marketing platforms, from paid advertising, like those commercials you saw. We continue to do that. Hopefully you've seen them recently on your own television, through public relations efforts, through experiential marketing by going to events where people are and talk to them about New York State, whether it's a food festival, a music festival, that kind of thing, all across the Northeast, sometimes even beyond that. We have particular segment marketing programs that make introductions to particular populations to explore New York State. You heard in my bio, I helped launch the I Love New York LGBTQ initiative, which is an example of that. I'm going to talk about another one in a moment, Path Through History. We have those traditional consumer travel tools that everyone would expect a destination marketing organization to have, like travel planners and a 1-800 phone number to call into. We do strategic partnerships. We're also in charge of licensing that I Love New York logo. So when you see a t-shirt or another souvenir with it on there, that's something we oversee, and we get a percentage of that for New York State. It's actually our only dedicated funding stream for tourism promotion here in New York State is from the licensing of the logo. Though thankfully our stakeholders from the governor to the legislature have understood the importance of tourism over the last many years, really, and continue to finance us well beyond that. We do international work, particularly with tour operators overseas. We participate at trade shows where we talk to people about selling New York State as a product. We do policy work, trying to make New York State a more hospitable place for tourism. And we actually oversee an interagency task force that includes dozens of partners from other state agencies that meet on a pretty regular basis to talk about what's going on in tourism. And then we also support New York State's huge tourism industry. We provide funding opportunities, grants for people to do work. We do educational program for partners across the state. And we even do some workforce development with our partners over at the New York State Department of Labor, doing, for example, virtual job fairs to get people interested in working in the New York State industry. Because I presume this group is going to be interested in it, I want to take just a moment to highlight one of those segment marketing programs. It's called Path Through History, and it focuses, as the name implies, on heritage tourism, people that like having historic sites, museums, things connected with history as part of their vacation experience. We have over 700 attractions in New York State that have been designated Path Through History attractions. They are organized under 14 different themes that really cover every sort of history you can imagine, whether that be the Revolutionary history, colonial, arts and culture, the Underground Railroad, equal rights, immigration, even sports and industry. So I encourage folks to go to ilovenewyork.com/Path Through History to find out about that program. One of the initiatives of that is twice a year we host Path Through History weekends, one in the spring and one in the fall, where we invite historic attractions across New York State to host events, and we then promote that through our channels. So that's something to take a look out for if you're interested in participating in that. in general, all that work that I just went over that we do here in New York State is complemented because we have such an amazing product, to talk crassly about New York State. If you think about it, there's really no other state in America that you could imagine doing all that you can do in one vacation here in New York State. I mean, there is nowhere else that you could be on one of the best beaches in the world in the Atlantic Ocean in the morning, seeing a Broadway show in the only place in the world you can see a Broadway show on Broadway in New York City. The next day, be touring a historic home in the Hudson Valley. Later that day, be on the longest zip line in North America in the Catskills. And then later that day, touring our state capitol. The next day, be on a high peak in the largest protected lands in the lower 48 states. Later that day, be on a boat touring island castles in the Thousand Island. The next day, you could be going to the only baseball Hall of Fame there is in Cooperstown in central New York. And then later that day, touring a winery in the Finger Lakes. The next day, at the only National Center of Comedy in the Chautauqua-Allegheny region. And then that literally can be a 3 or 4 day vacation. End that vacation under one of the great wonders of the world, Niagara Falls. You can see some of the other attributes of New York State here on the screen, but suffice it to say, we are so lucky to have this incredibly diverse offering for people going on vacation, really the best of the world and more than you can imagine in one vacation. When we talk about tourism in New York State and talk about vacationing, when we talk to consumers, travelers, we talk about New York State in terms of 11 vacation regions to help them focus on where it is they want to go on vacation. Some of these are very well brand names, for lack of a better term, like the Adirondacks or the Catskills. Some are lesser known, like the Chautauqua-Allegheny region, but the map here shows you those regions in New York State. And so what I want to do for the next 20 minutes or so, half hour or so, is basically take you on a virtual tour of the state, to talk to you about this amazing product that we have, this amazing state, and some of the ways we talk about these regions when we promote them, and some of the best attractions within them. We're going to start on the far western part of the state and basically work our way over to the east and then south and end up on Long Island. But starting in the greater Niagara region, over on the Canadian border, as the name implies, a huge part of it is Niagara Falls, one of the wonders of the world. Also, the oldest state park in America, founded by Frederick Olmsted. It's actually a great story. It's basically America's first tourism attraction and probably the first example of over-tourism. The reason it is a state park is because there was both industry and people maximizing the area for tourism in not so productive ways, putting up a fence, drilling a hole in it and charging people a nickel to see the falls. And people in the region looked around and said, that's not right. This needs to be an asset for not only the people of New York, but for the whole nation and world. How do we preserve it? Well, let's make it a state park. There had been no such thing. And it continues as the oldest state park in America. This region is also home to the great city of Buffalo, the home of buffalo wings. I sometimes have to remind people, buffalo wings don't come off buffaloes, they come from Buffalo. That's where they were invented. And you can still go to the Anchor Bar where they were invented today to experience those in their home. Just outside Niagara Falls and Buffalo, though, you also have some of the most picturesque areas of New York State. Letchworth State Park, you see the picture here on the screen on the bottom right, is referred to as the Grand Canyon of the East. It was rated the #1 favorite state park by USA Today readers just a few years ago. And also Buffalo and the area have a lot of the assets that a lot of people expected in the world city that it was for many years. So for example, they wanted their homes, the industrialists that lived there wanted their homes to be the best, created by the best. So they hired Frank Lloyd Wright to create properties for them. And some of Frank Lloyd Wright's greatest work is here and able to be toured. In each region, I'm going to highlight a couple of history things in addition, because I presume that's of interest to this group. You're going to be hearing throughout this presentation about New York's connection to abolitionist history and the Underground Railroad. There's a terrific heritage center in Niagara Falls opened just a few years ago that overlooks one of the bridges that was used to take enslaved people to freedom over in Canada. And there's a great heritage center there that tells that story in that region of the state. The Colored Musicians Club and Jazz Museum is a great venue. It's both a museum showing off the amazing jazz greats that have played there in its history, and they're going through a big expansion now that's also going to be a performance space where people can see current productions by jazz greats. You're going to be hearing about the Erie Canal throughout this presentation. It's an important part of New York's tourism story. The Erie Canal Discovery Centers in this region. And also you'll be hearing a lot about presidential history. The site where Teddy Roosevelt was inaugurated very quickly after becoming president is a National Historic Site in this region. I could go on, but to do all of New York State in just about 30 minutes, we're going to have to take this pretty whirlwind tour. So we're going to continue on and go south to the Chautauqua-Allegheny region of New York State. Tends to be a more rural area, but has a great connection to the arts, largely because of the Chautauqua Institution, which is sort of a gated community on a lake that is presenting art and various other enrichment programs since 1874. You may remember it was in the news for not so great reasons last year when Salman Rushdie was attacked there, but that at least gives you an example of the sort of programs that happen there every summer. There's speeches by authors, political leaders, thinkers, and also arts all day long. And that continues today. The arts legacy of the region has been added to in the world of comedy. Jamestown was the home of Lucille Ball, and she willed her collection to be part of a museum there, but also didn't want it to be just about her. She wanted it to celebrate comedy as an art form that lives and breathes and continues way beyond her. And her dream became a reality with the National Comedy Center, I'll be talking more about in a moment. This area also has some really interesting geological formations that you can tour. I'll be talking about that as well. And you'll also be hearing about grape growing and winemaking throughout New York State. The comedian Louis Black once said in a promotional video for us, if you could grow it in New York, we'll turn it into booze. And that's largely true. That's certainly true for grapes, though the grapes grown in this region are actually more for grape juice and jellies. Welch's, the company Welch's, doesn't have one grape farm. They cooperate with farmers across the United States. And more of Welch's grapes are grown in New York than in any other state, which is mostly in this region. That's also true of Manischewitz wine. As far as history goes in this region, some of these things I already touched on. The National Comedy Center, like I said, is the officially designated U.S. National Cultural Institution dedicated to comedy. Think of it as the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame of comedy, and it's right here in New York in Lucille Ball's hometown of Jamestown. I talked about those geological formations. You see a picture here from Panama Rocks. These really great parks that you can go to and walk among the rocks, through the rocks. They don't care if you climb up to the rocks, but it's a pretty amazing experience. It could be very vigorous from an athletic standpoint, or it can be very calm and soothing, just walking around the formations. You'll hear a lot about maritime history in New York State. That's true in this region as well. You'll see the Dunkirk Historical Lighthouse and Veterans Park Museum. It has a working lighthouse with its 61-foot tower, allows you to have an amazing water view that you could see 27 miles on a clear day. And also history in terms of art. The Roger Torrey Peterson Institute of Natural History, along with Audubon, Peterson was an artist who drew nature and created Peterson's Field Guide, which many of us have in our homes. Whenever we see unusual birds in our yard, we may take out the Peterson Field Guide to take a look at those. So continuing on our tour, we're going to continue to the east into the Finger Lakes, so named obviously for those lakes that look like fingers. They go north to south and are narrow, which is fairly unusual, and grouped together. And those, there are 11 of them actually, formed by glaciers back in the days when those geological formations happened. Also bordering a great lake, like a number of the regions I've been talking about so far, and two great cities in this region as well, Rochester and Syracuse. Because of its geological formation with the lakes surrounded sort of in valleys, basically surrounded on either side by slopes, it's sort of uniquely equipped to grow wines. So there are over 200 wineries, many of them on wine trails, and this area is famous throughout the world for its wines, particularly the sweeter wines like Rieslings. And so as a result, in addition to those great cities, you also have this beautiful sort of quilted landscape of farms and lakes and vineyards, and all kinds of trails to experience that on. This area also has a really amazing history when it comes to women's rights and abolitionist rights. Talk about that in a moment. And also the home to some globally unique cultural attractions. For example, you see a picture here from the Corning Museum of Glass, which has not only the history of glass, but the science of glassmaking and the art of glassmaking, an amazing gallery under an opaque glass ceiling so that the sculptures change throughout the day as the daylight changes. And throughout the day, you can see masterworks by gaffers, they're called, the artists that make glass, creating masterpieces right in front of your very eyes. They're live. There's actually so much to talk about in this region, so just a few historical highlights. I was alluding to the women's history. This was the place where the American women's rights movement was founded in 1848 at Seneca Falls with the Women's Rights Convention, where a group of women and some men met and put forward the radical idea that perhaps women should be equal and have the right to vote. That's now a National Historic Park that you can tour here in the Finger Lakes. The Strong National Museum of Play is the only museum in the United States dedicated to games and playing. It's the home of the National Toy Hall of Fame, the International Video Hall of Fame, and a lot of interactive. It's not just looking at artifacts. There's a lot of interactivity. There's literally a retro arcade or pinball parlor that you could play in, and a butterfly aviary, and much, much more. Abolitionist history this was an important part of the Underground Railroad. This is where Frederick Douglass lived, and this is where Harriet Tubman chose to be her home, thanks to some land that was granted to her by James Seward. Both the Seward home and Harriet Tubman's home, where she lived, aged, and died, are in the town of Auburn, and Harriet Tubman's now is a National Historic Park, one of two dedicated to her in the United States. There's also a New York Equal Rights Heritage Center there that talks about New York's history in the area of equal rights, so that's a really great location for anyone who cares about history or equality here in America. You'll be hearing about Native American history, and not just history, but the Native American culture throughout New York State. We have such a wealth when it comes to the culture, the history of Native Americans here throughout New York State. In this region, for example, is the Ganondagan State Historic Site, which was a 17th century Seneca town, and you could see that town now interpreted at that historic site. Going to continue our tour, like I said, being conscious of time, into central New York. This is also a fairly rural area of New York State with a lot of beautiful farm landscapes. Within that, some very charming towns and villages. Cooperstown, for example, which has, I'll be talking about in a minute, the Baseball Hall of Fame, and also the Farmers Museum, and a great gallery, and much, much more. This area also has had a booming beer and spirits industry for a long time, and has marketed itself to travelers as Brew Central, a great place to experience beer and brewing. And not only just beer, you don't even have to be a beer lover. A lot of these breweries are basically festival sites in terms of all summer. They're a great place where concerts happen and events happen. Brewery Amagon, for example, is a great example of that. And because of the sort of rural and farm history of this area, there are a lot of really great coordinated agritourism experiences, whether that's berry picking in the summer or apple and pumpkin picking in the fall. And this area also continues to have strong ties to Native American and abolitionist history. It also has a picture that you'll see there on the bottom right, which is Howe's Caverns, which is one of the greatest preserved show caves in the Northeast, where you could not only tour that by walking on these well-paved paths. It doesn't require you to be a heavy-duty spelunker, but there's also an underground river that you get to take a short boat ride on. So that's a great attraction in this region. And so here you could see those highlighted again. Howe Cavern's 6 million years old. It's always it's either 52 or 58 degrees, 30 some odd floors down there. If you go in the middle of summer and it's 85 outside, it's in the 50s down there. You go in the winter and it's 0 degrees outside, it's 50s down there. So it's a really great experience for people of all ages. Like I said, the Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum, of course, based in Coopertown, that's considered a must for any baseball fan and really anybody who loves and cares about Americana. Baseball is such an important part of the American culture. The Farmers Museum, the first Farmers Museum, the first museum dedicated to sort of rural American life, is also in Cooperstown. It's been part of a working farm since 1813, and it has a working barn, a creamery, animals. It's one of those places that you could actually see craftspeople showing how things were done throughout the history for farmers across New York State. So a great experience for the whole family. And the Fenimore Museum in Cooperstown really has an amazing collection, not just of art, but also historical artifacts. They have life molds, so they're basically life masks or life busts, as opposed to a death mask, which was made after people died. These were made while our founding fathers were alive and created these busts, so you could actually see what they look like with proportions, which is an amazing experience that's available at that museum. We're going to go jet to the north now into the Thousand Islands. As the name implies, it's all about water, 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 mainly the St. Lawrence Seaway. There are literally 1,000 islands in the Thousand Islands. It's not just named for a salad dressing, though the salad dressing is named for the region. But there are actually closer to 1,900 islands in the Thousand Islands. Some of those are quite big. Some of those are as small as a patch of land with some sort of tree. That's the definition of an island of the Thousand Islands. You must be above water year-round and have at least one tree on you. Because of the St. Lawrence, this is a top fishing destination. Also, not a lot of people know, but scuba diving, actually, among shipwrecks, ships that had outlived their lives, and then rather than have the expense of removing them from the water, were just sunk to the bottom. And there are now scuba diving companies that will take you down there to experience some of the best freshwater scuba diving in the world. In addition, on some of those islands, there are also castles that were built by wealthy industrialists I'll be talking about in a minute. Well, actually, I'll talk about it now. Bulk Castle is a great example of that. There's actually 2 island castles in the Thousand Islands. These are wealthy industrialists, generally many of whom lived in New York City, but loved vacationing in the Thousand Islands and fell in love with it so much that they built homes for themselves there. One is Singer Castle, named for Singer sewing machines, which is not only an island castle you can go tour, but has a suite on it that you could basically rent out the island and the castle for an overnight stay throughout the year. I've done it. It's a pretty amazing experience. And then there's Bolt Castle, founded by George Bolt. He ran the Waldorf Astoria in New York City, known for coining the phrase, "the customer is always right." He invented room service. And yes, he's the one who popularized Thousand Island dressing. Before he built this castle, he used to vacation with an outfitter company in the Thousand Islands doing hunting and fishing. They'd serve dinner. The woman who's the wife of the owner, created this salad dressing. He said, "This is amazing. Can I have the recipe?" He said, "Of course, Mr. Bolt." Gave it to him. He brought it back to New York City, gave it to his chef to start serving in the kitchen. The chef said, "Of course, Mr. Bolt, but what shall I call it?" He said, "Let's call it Thousand Island dressing." And that's where it was born. Here you can see some pictures, as I was talking about, of that freshwater shipwreck diving. It's a pretty amazing experience. Also in the town of Clayton is the Antique Boat Museum, which is a really great collection of, as you can see, those sort of wooden Chris-Craft boats. Not only just seeing them in sort of these hangars there on display, but you can tour a houseboat that's on the water. I think it was I'm pretty sure it was owned by George Bolt. And they'll also take you out in one of these boats so you could experience them on the waters. They were meant to be experienced. Also, an important battlefield site, a state historic site, Sackett's Harbor, which is the site of 2 battles in the War of 1812, is also in this region. So we're a little over halfway through our tour, which is good because I'm about halfway through my time. We're moving into the Adirondacks. This really is one of the greatest stories of conservation history in the United States, where New Yorkers had the foresight to protect an area of the state and including it literally in our state constitution as forever wild. Creating the largest protected lands in the lower 48 states. Now, this is a park, a 6 million acre park. It's bigger than Yellowstone and the Everglades and Grand Canyon and Yosemite and a bunch of others if combined into one. It's huge. But it's not to be thought of as sort of a gated park that's only about the recreation. It's actually a sort of public-private agreement that includes small towns in addition to those mountains and streams and rivers and lakes. So as a result, though, there are restrictions on what you can do in terms of developing it. You know, you can't build buildings over a certain height, or you have to be very careful in preserving the lands. So that makes this sort of a wonderful paradise for people who care about the outdoors. It's been enjoyed by people for centuries, really, decades, again, including like the Thousand Islands. Wealthy industrialists from New York City used to come up and build camps, they call them. They're more than camps. They're basically almost rural mansions in the woods. And as a result, that's where the word vacation was invented. These industrialists would be convincing their famous and powerful friends from not only New York City, but from Hollywood and Washington, and say, you need to get out of the heat of the city. You know, there was no air conditioning then. Come on up. The air is beautiful. The mountain breezes. You need to get out of the city. You need to vacate the city. Come up for a vacation. And that's where the American use of that word happened here for the Adirondacks. And it is still an amazing paradise for people who love nature and anybody actually looking for a great vacation experience. For example, the Wild Center and Wild Walk in Tupper Lake is a museum dedicated to indoor and outdoor nature experiences. Not only do they have sort of an indoor otter pond, but they have outdoor hiking paths. And as you can see, this amazing elevated wild walk, which is kind of like this high line above the treetops, this wooden walkway that takes you elevated above the treetops. And in doing so isn't just a scenic view. Along the way is bringing you the perspective of what is it like to be wildlife, and uses some really interesting techniques to talk to you about what it's like imagining to be a bird or a squirrel or something. My favorite example is as you're walking along the walkway, you look down and there's a silver dollar. You reach down to pick it up and you realize it's embedded in the walkway. And next to it is a plaque and said, of everything your eye can see here, your eye caught this tiny little round silver disc. Why? Because we've been trained that it is valuable. So it is innate in us that we see something like that, we're attracted to it. You see that coin the same way that a bird or a squirrel might see a hole in a tree. That's valuable to them because that may be a matter of life and death if they're being chased by a predator or looking for shelter. So I think it's a great example among many of how this Wild Walk and the Wild Center talk about nature and make it really personal. Right nearby Tupper Lake is Lake Placid. It's one of the few places in the world to have hosted the Olympics more than once, hosted the Winter Olympics twice, both historic. 1980, of course, the site of the Miracle on Ice on the ice rink there with the hockey team. So you can get on that ice, see that ice. You can see the oval where Eric Heiden won speed skating awards. You actually can bobsled yourself, it may be the only place in the United States, but certainly one of at most two, where non-athletes, Olympians, non-professionals can actually have a bobsledding experience, and it runs year round in both winter and summer. You don't need to pilot. They put a pilot on with you. You just hold on for dear life, like a really great natural roller coaster. I've done it. It's pretty amazing. You can tour the ski jumps that you see here. Very often you might be given a tour by a future Olympian. There are people that are training for the team, and they'll give you a tour. It's pretty great. Lake George is a great vacation destination for families, especially. Lots to do, from some of the most amazing miniature golf courses you've ever seen to, as far as history goes, the Minnehaha, one of the last steam paddle wheelers in the United States, right there on Lake George. And of course, Fort Ticonderoga, that beautiful 18th century star-shaped fort built by the French during the French and Indian War, but has also been important in the Revolutionary Wars. And there's a lot of demonstrations going on there throughout the day. There'll be musket fires and cannon fires and music and cooking and all kinds of other things. So a great place to experience colonial history in the Adirondacks. We're going to continue south into the capital Saratoga region, also really important as far as history goes. Obviously, it's our state capital now. Hasn't always been, but has for a long time. It's always been, though, a colonial center of influence with a lot of wealthy landowners that have cultivated the land, and a lot of their history waits to be explored through historic homes, including, of course, the Schuyler home, the Schuyler Mansion. Any fan of Hamilton knows it because it's sung about in the play Hamilton. When they say, let's get out of the city and away to the country, they're talking about Albany to go to the Schuyler Mansion, actually. And of course, Saratoga, which is the turning point of the Revolution, as you know, is a National Historic Site, too, so a great thing to tour. Also home to America's oldest sporting venue in Syracuse, the Saratoga Race Course, and those beautiful historic mineral springs that you can experience, whether walking through Congress Park downtown and actually sampling the water, some of which tastes nasty, but it's supposed to be really good for you, and some of it which tastes amazing, or bathing in it at the Roosevelt Baths and Spa, I'll be showing you in a minute. And also the towns of cities of Schenectady and Troy are in this region. Troy having some of the best preserved architecture from the industrial age. If you've seen the show The Gilded Age on HBO, you've seen it. That's where it's shot. We actually did a blog on ilovenewyork.com, which is a Gilded Age guide to New York State, which talks about all those sites across New York State that have served as settings for that show. But here this shows you in close-up some of those things I was talking about, the Saratoga Race Course, an amazing experience and really fun. When I moved to the capital region, at first I'm like, race course, I'm imagining old guys with cigars, and couldn't imagine sort of the stateliness of Saratoga Race Course or the family friendliness of it. It's a really great experience on a whole lot of different levels. Here you see a picture of those Roosevelt Baths and Spa right in the middle of Saratoga Spa State Park, which is still a working spa where you can take a mineral bath or get a massage. Saratoga Battlefield, as I was turning point of the Revolutionary War, and the amazing architecture in downtown Albany, not just past history, but modern history. For example, the Empire State Plaza, which shows all kinds of different architectural styles, and also a great collection of indoor and outdoor art in and around there. And of course, the New York State Museum there, a free attraction that shows you artifacts from across New York State and our history. We're going to continue south now into the Catskills. This is very close to New York City now, about 2 hours away. So for years, it's been a retreat for people in New York City, for a long time for people, for Jewish people. But all kinds of folks have looked to get to the Catskills because it was closer to the city, but still giving you the great experiences, places like the Thousand Islands and the Adirondacks and Saratoga, and I need to point out, not restricted like some of those areas were. And so a lot of Jewish resorts, the Borscht Belt, of course, famous there. If you've seen Dirty Dancing or The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, you have a sense of what the Catskills was, and to some degree is. It's really coming back with a real renaissance, both in terms of some very modern resorts from Yo One, which is sort of a holistic, very high-end retreat center, basically like a yoga center, or a lot of converted farms, old converted resorts into sort of more charming boutique experiences, some that bring nature right into where you're staying. And then, of course, when the Woodstock Music Festival happened in Bethel Woods, not actually in Woodstock, that's a whole story too, but in Bethel Woods, that brought a whole new element to the area as well, that sort of funkiness and artistic sensibility continues to live on in this area of the Catskills. And Bethel Woods, in fact, continues to be a museum of the 1960s, a state-of-the-art museum, but also a world-class concert venue within a covered amphitheater where you can see all kinds of different performances, from country to rock to jazz and everything in between. This area is also where fly fishing was born, and there is a museum, the Catskill Fly Fishing Center and Museum, you can see here, which is also a Hall of Fame, tells you about how that came about, the greats in that sport, and of course gives you the opportunity to learn fly fishing yourself. This area, and even more so the one I'll talk about in a minute, the Hudson Valley, are so beautiful, were so beautiful and continue to be, that they inspired a whole new way of painting called the Hudson River School of Painting. One of the founders of that movement, Thomas Cole, his home is here. The National Cole National Historic Site, so you can see his home, his studio, and some of his work there. The Bethel Woods Museum you heard me talk about, you can see a great picture of it here. That gives you a great sense of how high-tech and modern and world-class this museum is. Talking not about the concert itself, but in fact the whole culture of the 1960s. And you'll also see a picture here of the Bronx Museum. You'll see a lot of great examples of Dutch history and Dutch heritage and Dutch architecture all throughout this region, both in the Catskills and the Hudson Valleys. So speaking of the Hudson Valley, as I already teased it up, named for Henry Hudson, of course, who sailed up the Hudson River in 1609 and birthed that whole new way of painting that I was referring to. It is also the home of West Point, the U.S. Military Academy, a very important role in U.S. history. The Cultural Institute of America exists there still since 1946. It's been teaching people who want to become master chefs, and you can go and experience one of their, I think it's 4 or 5 restaurants now, where students overseen by master chefs are preparing meals from you, which is a terrific experience. This area was also, like I said, you've heard me talk about wine in the Finger Lakes, but this region also known for its winemaking. It actually is the home to the oldest winery in America called Brotherhood Winery. So a trivia question I often like to ask is, why would this be the oldest winery in America? What made it allowed to be so old? And the answer is in its name, the Brotherhood Winery. Brotherhood refers to monks because they were making religious wine in addition to other types of wine. That allowed them to stay open throughout Prohibition because freedom of religion trumped Prohibition, and they were able to continue making wine throughout that time for religious purposes, and that allows it to hold the claim as the oldest winery in America. But as you can see, this area is chock full of both nature and history. It has a higher concentration of historic sites, I'm told, than anywhere in the United States. Beautiful historic homes. Again, another area where wealthy industrialists made some, pretty modest weekend homes for themselves, but not modest at all. The Vanderbilt Mansion, the Rockefeller Mansion are there and able to be toured. The Roosevelts, who were a well-established family even before he became president. This is where Franklin grew up, and it's where his home remained. And as a result, he created the very first presidential library that exists there in Hyde Park. So you can tour his mansion, his presidential library, Eleanor Roosevelt's cottage that she had, Valkill, and their grave sites. They're both buried there as well. You'll see here the walkway over the Hudson, which is the longest elevated pedestrian bridge. It was originally a double-track railroad bridge, so it has a history as well, sort of a transportation history. But when that was no longer being used as a railroad bridge, some industrious folks said, well, let's create a tourism attraction out of it, and created this over a mile long walkway. I think it's 30 some odd stories above the Hudson River with spectacular views, the longest now elevated pedestrian bridge in the world. There's also in Newburgh, Washington, headquarters state historic site where Washington worked. I don't think he lived there, but I know he used it as a base in the Revolutionary War, and has some amazing artifacts. It still, as far as I understand, it has the original floors, so you're walking on some of the floors that George Washington walked on as well. gives you goosebumps. At least it did for me. We're getting toward the end of our tour, which is good. We have a couple of minutes left in New York City. And I actually spend the least amount of this time of my tour in general talking about New York City. Why? Because it's so well known. We know New York. We love New York City, the city that never sleeps, full of cultural icons and historic and history and experiences that are unique to it and known around the world. Whether that be the arts, whether that be architecture. Obviously, we could go on and on. The main thing I do like to say, though, in this tour is to remind folks, of course, do those must-sees, do those iconic things that we all know about. Go to the top of the Empire State Building, go to the Met, but don't end there. Think about the other boroughs and think about those lesser-known things. So, for example, to go out to Staten Island, see historic Richmond Town, which is a living history museum and historic farm that tells the story of colonial Staten Island. Go over to Brooklyn to go to the Transit Museum and go into a now unused subway station to see historic trains that you can climb aboard. Get out to Queens, which is basically where America's movie industry was born. It didn't start in Hollywood. It started in New York and moved out there. The great silent films took place at the Astoria Studios in Queens, and that is now the home of the Museum of the Moving Image, which has Jim Henson's collection, has artifacts from some of your favorite films. So any film lover, it's a must-see. And even within Manhattan, explore areas you haven't been to. Get to Upper Manhattan and certainly Harlem. Go down to the Lower East Side to see the Tenement Museum, which shows what it was like to be an immigrant in the United States and in New York City. So like I said, dig a little deeper when you go to New York City, and you'll be glad that you did. And I'm just about on time, so this happily we are at the end of our tour. Long Island. Of course, about the Atlantic Ocean and those beautiful beaches, some of the best rated beaches in the world, but also great history. This is where the Great Gatsby took place. So you can experience those Gold Coast mansions. They're still there, many of them to be toured. You can see some of them here. Oheka Castle is an example of that. Montauk, the tip of Long Island, Montauk Lighthouse is not only an amazingly beautiful view, but is important as far as history goes, because it's the oldest lighthouse in the United States that was actually commissioned by George Washington. Not a lot of people are aware of the aviation history of an aerospace history of Long Island. It's actually where the lunar module was created, and you can see one of those here at the Cradle of Aviation Museum, a really amazing museum on Long Island. And look, we started with Teddy Roosevelt in Western New York. We can end with Teddy Roosevelt here in Long Island, because Sagamore Hill was his summer White House, where he summered, obviously, as president. So another historic site to be toured. Before I totally end the tour, I want to mention just a couple of other sort of statewide activities that can't be contained to one region, but are worth mentioning. I already mentioned the Erie Canal system. It's going to be celebrating, well, it already celebrated its the 200th anniversary of the start of its construction. The 200th anniversary of the completion is coming up very soon. And so that you can experience the canal on the water, by the water. For example, the Empire State Trail, which opened just a couple of years ago, is the largest multi-use trail in the United States. It's 750 miles long, and it basically allows you to walk or bike from New York City to Canada, or from Albany to Buffalo. And that east to west spur is mostly along the Erie Canal. You're basically in the tow path of where the mules were towing the boats. So I don't expect too many people to do the whole 750 miles of the Empire State Trail, but as a visitor, it's great to do even small stretches of it and experience. It's really phenomenally beautiful. And we have great national scenic byways all across the state, where you don't even have to leave your car to see the beauty of our state, whether that's the Great Lakes Seaway Trail, the Lakes to Locks Passage, the Palisades Scenic Byway. There's so many. It's a great way to experience the state. And then I just wanted to touch briefly on some important upcoming events and anniversaries coming up, that there's going to be a lot of events around. And so as a result, those are important tourism draws. Next April, April 8th, in fact, is the next total solar eclipse here on Earth, and its path of totality crosses right through New York State. You can see the path here on the map. So we expect from Greater Niagara through the Finger Lakes and up into the Adirondacks, there's going to be all kinds of people coming to experience that once-in-a-lifetime event. Really only happens every 100 years or so. I mentioned the bicentennial of the canals, and of course we're a little ways away, but closer than you think, to the America 250 commemoration, where we will be commemorating America's 250th anniversary. And there is no America without New York State, whether that's Saratoga, our industrial history, or anything else. So you're certainly going to hear a lot there and see a lot of events as that gets closer. I'll end my tour there. And Tom, be happy to take some questions.
Awesome. First, I just have to say, I'm both exhausted because unbelievable. I've learned so much. I've learned about the definition of an island. I've learned about, well, where salad dressing, Thousand Islands comes from. But there's so much. Why would anyone leave New York State? Because, as you said, you can do it all, and it is wonderful. Thank you, Ross. Thank you so much. And not just for telling this story, but really highlighting all these great stories that are all over our state. Some are small, some are big. As you were talking, you're talking about Central New York and the beer production. New York was the hops production capital of the United States in the mid-19th century. We've got a lot of records in the state archives about that, a lot of great photos as well of hops production. But again, so many stories in New York. One question I have for you, and then I think we'll open it up to everyone else. There are a lot of smaller historic sites and smaller cultural institutions across the state that want to let people know if they're having an event or something's going on. And I know the I Love New York has a calendar. How do people get their information out on that calendar so it has a statewide visibility?
Sure. Yeah, not only those events, but in fact, the attractions themselves. We want to make sure we're promoting you, not only through Path Through History, but through I Love New York in general. The number one thing you can do is if you are not connected to your county tourism promotion agency, we call it a TPA, you should be. Each county in New York has assigned by its county government an agency, an organization that is charged with promoting tourism for their region. So they are our line of sort of first defense or first connection. Whenever we're doing any project, we work with them. And so, for example, many of them have their own events calendars. For many of them, if you get in their events calendar, it automatically feeds ours, which goes on ilovenewyork.com and our mobile app. They're also the first folks we turn to if we're doing a press release or something. As you can imagine, there are literally over 8,000 attractions in our database. It's easier to have conversations with 58 folks than 8,000. So that's the number one thing you can do. But I will also mention, by all means, if you have press releases, if you go to our website, you'll get information on emailing those to us so we can include those in our virtual newsroom that's called The Beat. You actually just send those press releases to The Beat at esd.ny.gov, and we can make sure to amplify those as well. Please engage with our social media accounts. And also you can take a look there to see the criteria for becoming a Path Through History attraction, and if that's of interest to you as well, because our job really at the end of the day is to help people know who you are and bring visitors to you.
Great, thank you. So for producers, now you know where to go. And for consumers like me, who now have a little more free time, I'm going to the I Love New York website and looking at that calendar of events because I know I'll have something to do every single day. Josie, I think we've got a couple of questions in the box. Can you bring us a couple of questions?
Absolutely. So one of the questions is, how many people from outside the state do come to visit these attractions every year?
It's a great question. It obviously ranges year to year, and COVID was, as you can imagine, quite a hit to New York State. But the last year we have records for currently showed us 220 million visitors. So that's a lot. New York is, tourism is really important to New York State, I should point out. The reason we're spending your taxpayer dollars to do this work and promote tourism is because it's vital to our economic health. We are New York's third largest industry, responsible for 1 in 10 jobs. We save every household in New York over $1,000 in state and local taxes that they would otherwise be paying if there wasn't tourism filling those coffers. Has a total economic impact of over $85 billion. That's with a B. But to answer the question directly, basically 220 million visitors came to experience New York State. And that, like I said, that number is actually down from our record highs pre-COVID. We're back to a large degree. We've made great progress year over year, but we're still a little shy of where we were pre-COVID. So we're hoping to get back to those numbers soon.
That's amazing. Well, I was certainly jotting down ideas while you were speaking. But I'm wondering, so it sounds like you've been to a lot of these places and experienced them yourself. What is, if there's one sort of hidden gem that you've seen that you wish people would visit more often, what would that be?
Oh, I'm always asked that, and you can't ask a parent to choose their favorite kid. Not to be paternalistic, I'm not being, but I'm not sure I can identify a favorite. Certainly, I couldn't have identified a favorite attraction. But I will say it mainly comes down to what you love. Not to overplay our I love New York motto, but it's true. It's, if you care about history, I mean, there's history everywhere, but as I said, you probably can't overdo the Hudson Valley. Like I said, more historic sites per capita sort of than anywhere. If you love nature, it's hard to outdo the Adirondacks. If you love food and beverage, it's hard to outdo the wineries of the Finger Lakes. So it's hard for me to pick a particular attraction or a region because it's largely going to come down to what it is that you love.
Well, there's definitely a lot to choose from. And certainly for those of you who are interested in history, there's so much. And so I hope that this has given people some ideas about where to start their vacations. So I want to thank you both so much for this insightful presentation. And thank you to everybody who joined us today. If you're interested in learning more, you can visit archives.nysed.gov. and ilovenewyork.com. That's iloveny.com. It's our privilege to make these events available to you and to keep New York State's history alive. If you're interested in the content we create and would like to see some more of it, please contact us at aptrust@nysed.gov, and you can receive a free past issue of New York Archives magazine, which I recommend highly. Please join us also on April 25th at 12:30 for our next New York Archives Magazine online speaker series entitled Tasting History with Elizabeth Jakubowski from the New York State Library and Heather Carroll from the New York State Archives. This program is co-sponsored by the New York State Library. You can visit our website, www.nyarchivestrust.org, to register for that event or to learn more about our past and future events. So again, thank you so much to both of you for this presentation today. And thanks to those of you who joined us. I hope you all have a great day.
Thanks, Josie. Thanks, Ross.
Thank you.